Back to my AW model. In this particular model, the colors actually are probably going to be enough to help make it easy enough for me to interact with this model. But I'm still going to use this model as my way of demonstrating how to use the diagrams to break things up visually. One thing to keep in mind before I start creating these various diagrams is I'm not breaking up the model. The model is still all of these entities. So what I'm doing is I'm just creating different design time visual representations of the model. And they're called diagrams, not views. Although in my mind, it makes sense to say it's just a different view of the model. But the problem is the word view has so many meanings in the data and database world. So instead, the term is diagram. So you can already see in the model browser that I do have this section called diagrams, and this default diagram is the one that's represented. I do like to keep a single diagram that does represent the entire model, so I would probably rename this to complete, and then I'll just remember to leave that around. There are a number of ways to create new diagrams. One is to start in the model browser and add a new diagram. Then you can start dragging the entities you want onto the designer surface. I'll create a new diagram by right-clicking Diagrams and selecting Add New Diagram. Now I can drag entities from the model browser onto the surface. I want to create a diagram that lets me focus on customer information, so I'll start with a customer entity. Notice that even though I have no related entities in this diagram, we're seeing the navigation properties for customer addresses and sales order headers. That's because those are part of the customer entity as the model sees them, and it doesn't matter if they're part of this particular diagram. Now I'll add customer addresses, and you can see that the designer automatically represents the association between the two entities that's already defined in the model. Also, notice I'm getting the default blue color of the entities. The colors are specific to each diagram, so the designer doesn't say, oh, she made customer and customer address entities red before, so they should always be red. I'd have to change that in this diagram if I wanted that color here as well, but I'll skip that for this demo. There's another way to add entities to the diagram. You can add entities that are related to ones already in the diagram. So from an Entities context menu, you can select Include Related. I'll use that to bring in any entities related to customer addresses, and that just happens to be one entity, which is address. Notice in the navigation properties that address also has a relationship to sales order header, but that wasn't pulled in too. That's because Include Related will only pull in entities that are directly related to the one you started with. But I'll go ahead and explicitly pull in sales order header, even though I don't really want it in this diagram. I'm just going to use this to show you another feature, which is how to remove entities from a diagram. So I don't really want this entity here. If I select it and hit the delete key, I get a dialog about deleting the entity from the model. I don't want to delete the entity from the model, just from the diagram. So you need to look carefully at this dialog, especially if you're not familiar with it. It's been around since Visual Studio 2010's Entity Framework Designer. And it's not saying, delete from model, are you sure? It's saying, hey, I'm about to delete this entity from the model, so while I'm at it, do you also want me to delete the metadata that describes the database table that this entity maps to? So if I said yes, then the entity will go away from the model, not just the diagram, but the whole model, and the metadata won't even know that the related table exists in the database. If I say no to the question, the entity will still be deleted from the model completely, but the metadata will still be aware of the database table. But the real answer in this case is that you want to cancel this operation completely. I'm not deleting anything. I just want to remove this from the diagram. So the fact that I'm seeing this dialog is a red flag, and I'm happy that it alerted me to the fact that hitting the delete key was not what I really wanted to do. I don't want to delete it. So I'll go ahead and cancel, and instead I'll right-click and choose the real option that I wanted, which is to remove the entity from the diagram. After doing that, you can look over at the model browser and you can see that the sales order header entity is still there. So this is what I want in my customer diagram, and I'll go ahead and give it a proper name. Another way to create a new diagram is from an existing one. Let's say I want a diagram that focuses on the order. I can select Sales Order Header and Sales Order Detail, and then from the Context menu, I can choose Move to New Diagram. The designer creates a new diagram and places the entities on it. But if we look back at the diagram we just came from, the entities are gone from the complete diagram. Move means move. It doesn't mean copy and paste. So sometimes you'll want that behavior where you want to remove it from one diagram and place it onto a new diagram. So that's good. But in this case, it's not, because I really want to keep my complete model intact. So let's go ahead and undo that. I have to click undo 3 times before I see the entities again. That's because I'm not really undoing one step, but 3. When I did the move, that actually entailed creating a new diagram, cutting the entities from the complete diagram, and then pasting them into the new one. So with undo, I am literally undoing each of those 3 actions.